Welcome to the Red, White, and Blue Collar Podcast. This is your host, Edgar Jimenez. And this podcast is not just about unions, it's politics. We're going to talk about economy. We're going to talk about what's going on in Washington, D.C., and how that's affecting us. We're going to dive deep into a lot of touchy subjects. So if you're tuning in, thank you so much. I appreciate you. I've been working on this for a few months. I got the mic, I got the headset. I'm ready to rock and roll. And here we are. For my first episode, I will say is I want to reach out to that probationary agent or that newly union member. And I want to explain to you why unions are important. I want to give you the general picture of why unions should exist. But in order to understand why unions are great, we got to understand and talk about those who don't have unions. So what happens when you don't have a union? And my biggest example is these Walmart workers, these Uber drivers, these people who work for Amazon. Look how they work, the conditions they work. Understand that their pay is not, the same as somebody who's unionized. You're going to see this day in and day out because a lot of Americans are in jobs that don't have unions. I think only 14.3 million Americans are in an organized union. That leaves the rest to be unorganized and not have a collective bargaining agreement. So let's kick it in. Why are unions important? Unions exist to balance power. Usually workers have limited leverage. Again, going back to that Walmart worker, he can't fight for a better pay, right? He can't go out there and say, hey man, I've been busting my ass for you guys, and I'm still getting paid $17 an hour. And that one voice is not gonna make a world of a difference. But together, collectively, you can make a difference. Collectively, you can negotiate better pay, better benefits, working conditions. I mean, you go back again to that Walmart worker when he's out there, stacking a shelf and you see the step stool that he's on that's in bad conditions. He can't say nothing about that. He just gets on at his own risk and he prays that it doesn't fall apart. You also, in a union, you could protect against unfair discipline or firing practices. When you walk into work, you can't just be told, hey, Edgar, good morning, but you're fired. Why is that? Well, you just fired. I decided to fire you, right? And that's what I called at-will workers, which is like a nightmare. Those people who work at will, which is majority of Americans, it's wild, right? That you could just show up to work and because you didn't say good morning fast enough, you're terminated. And when you're together, you have a real voice in your workplace decisions. When in my company, they do town halls and we get together and we really listen to what the company has to say and we, have a rebuttal to a lot of things that they have to say because they're not out there. A lot of people also don't understand that, unions were the ones who made weekends possible, overtime pay, right? If I'm going to be told that I need to stay at work longer, I'm going to get compensated correctly. Safety rules, right? We all want to come home back to our families. We need management to understand that the work environment that we're in, it's unsafe and a lot of things can happen. So we need safety rules in place. Paid leave. That's another thing. Baby bonding, things like that. That's all you could gain together, being together and organizing a union. What should you know as a new union member? I tell all my probationary agents when I was a trainer back at the station is, hey, you need to open up the CBA. Here's a CBA. Here's a contract. Here's a collective bargaining agreement. And it's basically a book with rules, right? In that book, there's going to be different articles, different sections. It's going to talk about pay rates. It's going to talk about how your raises work. It's going to talk about how scheduling works with seniority. It's going to talk about overtime rules, discipline procedures. We get discipline. It's going to talk about the grievance process, which is a very important process. It's your voice. When I think I was 21, 22 years old when I got this job at a major airline. Shortly after, 6 months after I joined the union, I became a union member. And I wasn't really involved until I came to Orlando and met this guy named D-Train, shout out D-Train, who, told me, hey man, what can we do as a union to better help this work environment, this toxic work environment at the time? And I gave some ideas, right, that they could do. But D-Train, he threw something at me. He said, well, maybe you should join the team and be that difference. And I wish I would have read the book from the very beginning because I would have been such ahead of the game. And I had so much catching up to do when I became an alternate rep, an alternate shop steward. Also, understand that once you have a union, you have representation. If there's any issue, you don't want to go into that principal's office by yourself. You don't want to go to these meetings by yourself. You want a shop steward. You want a union representative there. It's your right. You could tell the manager, hey, wait, I'm looking for a union rep. I always tell my members that if no shop steward is around, no union rep is around, give me a call. Do not answer questions without me being in that call. And all this, all this that I just mentioned, obviously costs money. And a touchy subject is union dues. And I tell people that, union dues are pretty much like an insurance policy, right? For your work. You pay union dues to have representation. You pay union dues to have better negotiation outcomes, right? You're going against a very rich company. That means that they're going to have the best lawyers. They're going to have the best equipment to fight against what we're asking for. We need the same thing. We need good lawyers. We need to go in there prepared. And union dues, right? Obviously, talking about negotiations, they do fund contract negotiations. They pay for legal support. They pay for your training for your shop stewards. They enforce contracts when it comes to arbitrations, right? Arbitrations are expensive, and union dues, they pay they pay the cost of going into arbitration to protect language or to protect unfair discipline. And like I said, think about dues as the life insurance. I mean, we all have some type of insurance. This is called, workers insurance, I like to call it. And, whether you pay car insurance, life insurance, any type of insurance, look at it as a good investment for yourself. In order to be a good union, in order to be a very established, organized union, you got to have solidarity, right? And for me, solidarity is the secret sauce into a good union, right? But we got to look out for each other. Don't let management divide us. It happens all the time where management splits the union in half, right? Where we're arguing with each other. We have to stop that, right? And how can we stop that? By solidarity. We show up together. We show up to these J lines, to these membership meetings, to these union outings. We show up when it comes to voting, right? For our leaders. We want to go out there and vote. And most importantly, think about it like this. There were people in America in our history that weren't allowed to vote, whether you were a woman or whether you were an African American. There were times where people couldn't vote, and voting is so vital. You look at these other countries in today's world that can't vote and that there's rigged elections. I mean, think about it. And when you don't vote in anything, whether it's politics or at your local election, it's sad because people fought for that right. You being a union member, you have a voice. Now use it, right? It's time to use it. Again, going back to voting, vote on the contracts, vote for leaders, see who's running, involve yourself, ask the questions. Maybe you want to run for shop steward. Maybe you want to take an officer role. Maybe you want to change the contract, and that's why you're voting. People think that unions are like this third party entity at work, and they're not. They're the workers. It's all of us together as unions, and you need to know your rights, right? You need to go ahead, like I said from the very beginning, open up the CBA and read, and then go out. Google certain things, right? Google, just cause and what it means, right? Stand, work policy and progressive discipline. Then, seniority. I think seniority is the most favorite system, because what happens when you go ahead and again, you work at Walmart, right? How do they pick the shift bids, or how do they, who gets this weekend off or who gets this holiday off? A lot of the times is, the manager's pet, right? Whoever the manager likes, and that's not right. Seniority is a system that the more time you have with the company, the better quality of life you have. That's something that we got to keep in mind. Why seniority is so important. Common myths that you're going to hear out there. These are the negatives. Unions protect bad workers. No, union protects due process. Good workers benefit from this process. That's how that works. We're not here to defend bad workers. We're here to defend the contract. We defend the contract. The union is a separate entity. No, union means together, right? As a whole, all the members as one, and we all have one voice. And when we vote, whatever decision that is, that's the decision that we put forward, and we carry that decision. Nothing changes. People say, oh, nothing changes at work. Well, change is slow. Change takes a lot of things, right? That's why I tell you guys, be part of the union, be involved, because if you just think that change is going to happen overnight, then you're wrong. Nothing in this world happens overnight. I tell people when members are frustrated, my members are frustrated, I say, hey, listen, we're working on it. It's in arbitration, or this is the step and this is what we're doing. if you come into work thinking that we're going to, solve every issue, we're not. There's always going to be a fight. There's always going to be a challenge. The company's not going to be perfect. Remember, the company wants to make the most money out of your work. They want to pay you the least. They want to treat you like you're just a number. And that's when we come in, right? And it's going to be, again, we're going to solve a battle and we're going to get into another one. I tell people, my members, I tell them all the time, I'll say in Orlando, there's always a problem with a supervisor, and it sucks because the union pushes and fights to get that supervisor fired, and the company fires him because he's violating every rule and he's so disrespectful and he's a threat to us, and then they hire another one who's just if not worse than that supervisor they just fired. And then we go through the process again of trying to fire that individual. But yeah, it's hard. And a lot of these managers, me now being in this position where I get to talk to these different managers, but the problem is that we live in a world today where only 14.3 million Americans are unionized, which is a small percentage. And a lot of these managers who come from other jobs, they don't understand that, the company they work for now has a union. And in that union, there's a contract. And they just find it hard. So when I speak to these managers, I said, listen, I get it. Sometimes it's hard to run your operation because there's all these set of rules, but you got to understand what you put yourself into when you took the job. When you took a job as a manager for a company that has a union, you got to understand that off the bat, we don't care about your rules. We care about the rules that were negotiated. And that's what you got to understand. And sometimes you might think that those rules are impossible to put in place in your station, but it is what it is. So again, there's so many different battles that we're fighting, so many different things. I mean, from wrongful terminations to language that the company is trying to remove from our contract or try to add extra language that they didn't negotiate. I mean, it's constant. It's a constant fight. So as a new union member, please, please, please open up that book. You need to open up that book. You need to inform yourself. Start Googling, different things about unions. Start looking at, what does just cause mean? Start reading on arbitration rulings, how that works. Because when I got involved deeply in the union, it was like a whole new world to me. And it was really interesting. So again, thank you for tuning in, guys. I promise you that this podcast is going to get better. Like I said, I'm going to, have better equipment. And thank you guys for your patience. And I hope to catch you on the second episode of this podcast. Have a good one.